if you're not speaking.
Hello, everyone. So we expect this meeting to be quite short because we are going to have a complete 3-day session of SIP meeting, SIP meetings in 1 week and a half. So we're going to go through the last batch, the SIP batch, the second SIP batch that we agreed on last meeting, and the idea is that after the batch, after the discussion, which hasn't generated lots of discussion in Scala contributors, we'll also introduce a program that Daria has prepared for the 3-day session in November. So we're going to start with Eugene. And Eugene was in charge of supervising intersection types and union types. He has created a very thorough document explaining his feedback. So we will link to it in a second in the chat, so that all our viewers have access to it. And yeah, please, Eugene, could you tell us a little bit about your findings and what you think could be improved in the proposals?
All right. Hello, everyone. As Jorge said, I looked into union and intersection types. I wouldn't say that I supervised them. For sure, just read the feedback and thought a little bit about what's written in the spec. So anyway, I split my feedback into 3 parts. The first part is motivation, because this is something that we discussed during the last SIP meeting. Why are we adding those features to the language? What is the projected impact? The second part is going to be about the spec. So I think it's high time to think about updates to the specification. And finally, a little bit about compat. Since intersection types and union types are new features to Scala, there's not much to be said, but still a few feedback points as well. So speaking of the motivation, I think some of the points in the proposals, they would use clarification and examples. So for instance, the SIP on intersection types, it says that A with B is about to be deprecated in some future version of Scala because it's not commutative, and intersection types, they improve on that. So it looks like this needs more clarification. It was a big discussion on Scala contributors, so I think just summarizing this discussion and putting it into the proposal document would be useful for future reference. Also, another example, another feedback point inspired by contributor scalalang.org is so non-commutativity is kind of bad academically, it's unsatisfying, but why is it bad in practice? On the forum, we saw something that Adrian called a contrived example, but perhaps it would be great to see a real life example where non-commutativity of compound types is actually a problem. Also, a few more points about more advanced parts of type system stuff. That'll be about the union types proposal, which had just one comment, by the way. So things like exploding lobs and a couple of use cases for union types, Scala.js interop, null safety. So they're mentioned in the documents as is, without clarifications. And I guess, again, for future reference, it would be great to provide more details. And finally, this also concerns other new language features, but since I was responsible for providing a summary for unions and intersections, that'll be only about them. So what are the best practices of using those new kinds of types? So the calculus looks solid. There's a few papers published about dot, where these things directly come from to Scala. But, how will these new types improve the lives of regular Scala developers? So what are the idiomatic uses? In the documents, we saw some synthetic examples which kind of show member selection, stuff like this, but how do we put them to good use once Dotty lands? So this is it about motivation. Now a few questions about spec. So I just went through the currently available specification for Scala 2.11 and 2.12, and there are a few sections that seem to be affected. I think it would be good to provide updates to them. In particular, syntax. So what is the priority of intersection and union types Because currently we have something that looks similar syntactically. We can have infix type application, looks exactly the same. So how do we disambiguate? Also, is it even possible in Dotty, once this feature, where these features are implemented, is it possible to define type constructors, bar and ampersand? Just minor things like that. It would be great to update the spec because they become evident there. And also in chapter 3 of the specification, there's a bunch of stuff which tells us how these types behave. What are the members of union and intersection types? What is the conformance? How does the conformance relation works now with these new types? And finally, what about erasure? So it may seem that these are very nitpicky questions, but actually in the document I have a link to a pull request, not a pull request, to an issue in the Dotty repository. I hope GitHub is working right now for everyone, but later on you could look it up. In a nutshell, there was a question why you cannot override a method that takes one intersection A and B with a method that takes a parameter of B and A. So although A and B, B and A, they kind of seem commutative, well, they ought to be, well, intersection types ought to be commutative. This still didn't quite work. As far as I understand, that was because of erasure. However, the conclusion has not been reached. So what I'm getting at is that I think it would be beneficial to update the spec so that these tiny tricky points, they become obvious and we fix them before this is shipped in production software. And finally, something about type inference, I think would also benefit clarification. The SIP about union types, it says that union types in most situations must be declared explicitly. So they're rarely inferred, if I understand correctly. So what does most situations mean? So when exactly can union types be inferred and when not? Finally, speaking of compatibility, as I promised, these features are not present in Scala, so there's not much to talk about. Although, since we envision scenarios where Scala 2 modules use Scala 3 modules, perhaps we could talk, will Scala 2 programs be able to use Scala 3 programs with unions and intersections? Maybe we can somehow approximate those types. Who knows? Maybe you guys have thought about this. And the last remark, the SIP also talks about deprecating compound types. So those A with B things. Do we need to decide on this within the same SIP? Because it seems one could say these are two different things, adding a new language feature and deprecating another. Do we need multiple votes? Do we need one vote? So let's just make this clear. Okay, this is it on my side. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you for the thorough revision, Eugene. So I think that in order to have a more or less a structured discussion, it would be good to go point by point and try to be concise so that we don't spend too much time just discussing these two proposals and then we can move to the next ones. So if somebody has concrete feedback about some of the questions raised, you're like we, yeah.
So I agree with the spec things, I guess with all of them, that indeed we should specify all of these things. And in fact, that has been done. So there are two merged pull requests, one by Feng Yong and the other by Guillaume, that I believe address all of these points. Guillaume had mentioned another point that's still missing, and that's how they do interact with base types. But definitely members, conformance, rules, erasure, they're all in there. And syntax is also in there. So we have a spec. If you look at the intersection type spec, it says that and is a soft keyword. That means it's treated like an identifier, an input. But basically, if there is an and used as an identifier in an infix operator, it's treated as an AND type. So that's how that. I mean, there is a spec for it. Not exactly sure whether it's clear enough or whether one should add further clarifications to it. But
all right. So I guess GitHub, it was just down most of your guys' day in Europe. Yeah, let me look at it. I'll post further feedback.
Okay, cool.
One clarification. So SLS 3.4 it talks about base types and members. So I mean it's
indeed
I mentioned just members, but
okay.
Spec for base types, it would be appreciated, of course.
Yeah. My observation is that it's probably better to roll it all in one, to essentially have an proposed amendment to base types, because they're sort of cross-cutting with all the new types. You have to specify what the base types are. But we can have a look at that.
Just a very quick question about the on 3.4. Eugene, having mentioned it here, I went and had a really close look at it. What the spec says about membership, it seems to me, it gets very, very close to the topic that was being discussed on the GADT and opaque type stuff in terms of whether or not Scala supports subsumption. It looks to me as though there's enough in the membership section, and maybe it doesn't quite get you subsumption as such, but it certainly gets you very close to subsumption, at least from a practical programmer's point of view. If you're saying that the members of an intersection type are, sorry, which way around are we? Anyway, if we're saying the members of an intersection type are the members of both types intersected, then it seems hard to avoid some conclusions about what goes on in the opaque type and GADT refinement cases. But I don't know if that's a sidetrack for this discussion, but it seems to me that if we're looking at doing a pass through that section of the SLS, that's another consideration that ought to come in here. It feels like there's a relationship between.
So I would say yes. I mean, of course, you want to be as close to subsumption as possible, and with intersection types, actually, we can play nicely and essentially have something which essentially would give you exactly the same thing as what you would have under subsumption. With union types, it's already not so easy, and there's a long section in the just merged union type spec that explains why. So basically, it's we do what we can to approximate subsumption, but sometimes it's just not possible.
Okay.
So just for our viewers and also for Eugene, I just linked right now into the talks of Tali that are supposed to be working with the last merge PRs. So check them out, and would you have like a list of all the examples there? So
one more question. Now that we're talking about the spec, perhaps it would make sense to just fork the spec in the Dotty repository and update it directly. So currently, these are independent documents, but I think just going through the spec, at least for me, it was beneficial. Go through all the parts, all the sections of chapter 3, and see how intersection and union types interact with all of that. So writing this part of feedback, it was super, super easy, just scanning the text. Now, what do you think about this, guys?
Yeah, so the main issue with that, I agree that at some point we will have to do this, and it's good to do this. It's just a question of time. So my original time plan was to do this basically once we reach stabilization period, so we have feature completeness, and then we would sort of have parallel efforts to improve compatibility, improve stability, and essentially fill in the spec. But I agree that poses a problem for the SIP process. It would be easier to have a common spec for everyone. It's just a matter. It will take a lot of time to go through everything and add it there.
Well, what I propose, we don't have to do this all at once. So let's say we're discussing union and intersection types, then the delta to the spec would be just unions and intersections. Yeah, otherwise it would take a lot of time. We would need to pause, the SIP process for a few months, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. That could be a good way to do it, to put it directly in the spec. It's just that sometimes maybe the spec doesn't follow, the current spec doesn't follow a format that would make it easy. So I guess I would say let's do it as far as possible, but let's keep the sort of separate SIP thing as a possible alternative if the changing the spec directly turns out to be too cumbersome.
Yeah. Also, like Eugene has mentioned, several non-specification points that are more related to examples, and we need more examples. We need to show people and developers how they can use these features. So that's something that maybe doesn't belong to a spec, and we want to keep separate and in a more in a less technical document.
Mm-hmm.
So if I've understood you correctly, I think that like a good way to move forward or move the revision forward, the next review forward, is that Eugene has a look to the latest changes that both Fondu and Guillaume have done, and then it compares the diff of what they've done and the diff of the review that Eugene has just given, and then just we discuss the missing items or the that diff in the next November meeting. How does that sound to you, Eugene?
I think it's good, but you know the question about compound types still stands. So do you want to discuss them in this thing, or it's a separate SIP removing compound types? I remember Martin's comment on Scala contributors that leaving both compound types and intersection types, it complicates things significantly. So perhaps this needs to be decided now.
Yeah, I guess. I think there's no way we can keep both, and the Dotty compiler doesn't implement compound types, and I see no way how it could ever do that. So, and I don't think we will waste any effort to actually do that. It just would add to the confusion. I mean, intersection compound types are. Let me put it this way: in all the code I've seen, I've never seen a difference where it would make a difference from one to the other that wasn't contrived. So intersection types are just essentially a saner version of compound types, and that's it. So essentially, compound types have several traps and pitfalls, which we have discussed in the contributors things, and intersection types don't have them. That's basically the short summary of things. So we won't actually go back and try to reintroduce the traps and pitfalls into the compiler. That's just not very productive effort. So for me, they are definitely linked. So we can't have one and the other at the same time.
Okay. Right. Well, let's update the document then, because it says that compound types will be removed in some future version of Scala.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that wasn't clear. So what the situation is, compound types, the syntax of compound types is kept, but it actually means intersection types. So maybe we misunderstand each other. Are we talking now just about the syntax? So the question: do we want to keep with as an alias for ampersand indefinitely, or do we talk about essentially the basics, the semantics?
I actually meant the latter, but since you're bringing up the former, yeah, that's also a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll probably want to keep with for a while for compatibility purposes.
Exactly. Oh yeah, of course. So the main reason for keeping it is that we have this policy to say we need to be able to cross-build for the 3.0 version. So that means we can't deprecate or a feature that is essentially the essential analog of a Scala 3 feature in Scala 2. So since width is the analog of AND, we can't deprecate it, definitely not for the 2.14 or 3.0 time frame. So that's why it has to come later. So why we want to keep it. We want to be able to cross-build without deprecation warnings, basically.
Okay, it's a bit concerning though that the behavior will be different between Scala 2 and Scala 3 of the width keyword.
But like I said, I mean, we have extensive experience with incompatibilities. You can believe that. It's a major headache, and intersection types never showed up once. So they're just in practice they're not the issue. There are lots of other issues. I can give you a long list of issues that we have, and some of them are downright crazy, but not intersection types.
It's also very likely, I think, that any case where the Scala 2 code works and doesn't fall into the pitfalls, the new interpretation as the intersection type is equivalent, and that's why we haven't found. So the cases where the interpretation actually ends up meaning something different are cases where the Scala 2 code would just do something wrong.
Or weird, yeah.
Or weird, and it would have been avoided already.
Well, all right. This answers the question.
Great. So let's move on to the next discussion. Since Julian is not here, it will be Sebastian, the one that will make his case. He has like I had some problems sharing the document that contains all the feedback of the reviewers. I will try again, but he's gonna read it now. In the meanwhile, so
I'll have to. Fortunately, I trained my sight reading skills. First thing is that trade. So it's about the trade parameters. Apparently, they didn't generate a whole lot of debates. There are two main points that were raised. One is what's left to differentiate between trades and classes. So Adrian answered, noting specifically that linearization order, it's difficult, is fixed, as in not it was broken and now it's fixed, but it's settled when you define a class, while where you define a trait, it's still left open for the first class to mix those ins. That's one thing. Second is the interaction with implicit parameter lists, where a trait that's inherited indirectly will need to be repeated to fill in parameters. Even though they are implicit and syntactically, they would still be missing. So I just read that verbatim. I'm not sure I understood what I read myself.
That's the example that Oron put in the thread in which you had to propagate transitive trait dependencies in the class. You had to rewrite.
Right. So since only classes can eventually pass parameters, so actual parameters to their super traits parameters, constructors, that also applies to implicit parameters, basically. And that means that if you have several traits that have, in a hierarchy, that have just the same implicits, eventually they need to all be fixed by the class that merges them.
Yeah.
So then another point here is, so specifically on that point, Oron Port raised a proposal where the compiler would automatically insert necessary trait superclasses with implicit parameter lists at the point where a class is inheriting them indirectly. Martin suggested to keep things less magical for now and perhaps add that in a later version. So that's about it for the written summary here.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any questions. I think I had also mentioned something about that. I don't remember what.
In the last meeting, we were discussing about the fact that a class could not just extend. No, I think a trait could not just extend another trait that has parameters.
Right, a trait cannot. Yeah, a trait cannot pass parameters to its super trait. So yes, that's another difference between traits and classes.
Yeah.
And also interoperability.
So do we
with
think
Java and JavaScript? So.
Do we think in general that we should have some special guidelines for people to grasp more clearly the differences between classes and traits? Because so far they look quite academic. Linearization order and the chaining of trait parameters are features. Are consequences of the current encoding, and you need to understand already traits to know whether you have to use them or not. Maybe we should have some, direct way of telling people you should use traits for this and you should use classes for that.
That's very difficult.
It is difficult.
It's,
but
as in not possible. It's a design problem, and it's specific to each code base and each. With requirements and a whole lot of. This is basically developers' job. This is what they do as a living. So I don't think we can provide that. But one thing we could definitely provide is a finite list of all the things that still differentiate classes from traits. Since that has been raised as a question, it's probably worth mentioning.
So
I mean, in the proposal,
I guess
as a clarification.
The most important aspect, I think, would be just to have a default. Like, it's true that it's difficult to know where to choose a trait and a class, and some people that are already seasoned Scala developers may have a grasp of when to use which one. But from the outside, people that don't know the language or are not as familiar with the internals of how everything works in Scala may want to have just some kind of guideline that also people can, like seasoned developers, can teach to the beginners, right? So I think it would be interesting to have a default, or like agree on a default. By default, should we use traits or should we use classes?
We have in the programming in Scala book, we have some advice when to use what. But I think it's advice, so I don't think it should be part of the SIP committee to give a clear recommendation. People would just start to disagree, and we would have a fruitless debate.
All right. So let's move on to the last discussion that is going to be.
We have a couple of things here online. So Seth says, my impression that any controversy about trait parameters wasn't primarily about the addition, it was about the eventual removal of early initializers. I don't remember whether that was a separate SIP or not. I think it was. So maybe we can move that to the discussion that's related to that SIP. Also, Nth Portal asked to clarify, does that mean that you cannot extend a trait which has trait parameters? No, it does not mean that. A trait can extend another trait which has parameters. It's just that the subtrait is not the one that can pass the parameters. It will be the responsibility of the first subclass that mixes in those things. And yeah, the rest is the same kinds of discussions. Yeah, we're not going to have case trait, Seth.
So we have 25 minutes left. So let's go to the last discussion that is going to be introduced by Miles. It's about he's been reviewing implicit function types and dependent function types.
Yeah, well, similar situation to the one with trait parameters, in that there really wasn't very much discussion on the Scala contributors threads at all. On the, I think to the extent that it's probably worth treating the two together rather than trying to sort of deal with them separately. I mean, I think certainly my sense of what, I mean, so there are two ways you could read this. I mean, on the one hand, you could interpret this as kind of implying that you know the features are uncontroversial. That would be nice to think. And the other possibility is that we just haven't conveyed them particularly well. They're not motivated enough. Nobody cares enough to really make a comment on it. I kind of think that's not the case. Certainly my sense with respect to dependent function types is that there are enough people out there in the community who are really quite enthusiastic about these things. Implicit function types, for obvious reasons, have been a bit more high profile. So I get the sense that if there were major issues that people were having with the feature as described, we would have seen some more comments. So I think we should take it that basically the way the features have been presented is something which is generally rather uncontroversial, rather aside from some sort of relatively kind of minor semi-orthogonal kind of things, which I think is really good. So in terms of the actual concrete comments, really there was no comment at all really on the dependent function types, other than a sort of a sidetrack responding to Martin's comment at the head of the thread. You know, once we have dependent function types, of course we want to have polymorphic function types as well. I kind of think that the example that was given was perhaps a little bit more interesting than Sebastian responded to an example of basically trying to capture something at the value level, which corresponds to overloading of methods, for example, and that sort of evolved in the direction of talking about intersections or unions of function types, which I kind of think wasn't really quite what was being got at. I think ultimately what the poster was looking for was something a little bit similar to Shapeless's polymorphic function values. I think it certainly seemed that the kinds of use cases being described for it looked similar to that. I kind of think that's somewhat orthogonal to dependent function types per se. However, I do think that something similar to Shapeless's polymorphic function values should drop out of the combination of dependent, implicit, and assuming we get there, polymorphic function types pretty much directly. So it'd be kind of interesting to sort of accumulate some examples of things that people want to try and use that kind of stuff for. But the feature dependent function types as such appeared to be uncontroversial. There were no significant, well, there were no issues at all raised against the way that they're currently described. So I think that's that. Implicit function types, again, I was a bit surprised at how little there was in the way of discussion around that. It kind of seems like most of the discussion has been happening elsewhere in the context of people looking for solutions to other problems and having conversations around whether or not implicit function types are applicable in this case. I think the main kind of thing, so there's quite a nice example pointed to about using implicit function types for scope injection. I kind of think that the thread that was linked to there is interesting, and I think this ties into what Eugene was talking about earlier on in terms of wanting to have examples. I think we've got an interesting new language feature, and I think at the moment people are sort of groping around for things that they can do with it, and it would be nice to sort of maybe try and catalog a bunch of interesting examples of new patterns, new idioms that people might try and make use of in one way or another. In terms of the actual concrete comments on the feature, there really were none. I didn't see any criticism. At least there's none in that thread, at any rate. As far as the application that was linked to in a separate thread, I think the conclusion in that thread was that basically implicit function types provide everything needed to do it, to fit the bill for that. So I think that's kind of a good result there. So I think that's it as far as the public comment is concerned. My own kind of sort of editorializing comment is that, as I've said before, I really want to see both implicit and dependent function types treated together because that they will interact. And I'm also very, very keen to see the polymorphic function type work that Guillaume has been doing pushed forward. I think that all three of these things should be treated under the heading of making method types first class, effectively. I mean, this is something that I think is absolutely key that we get in. I think it would be a real missed opportunity if we don't do that. I guess that's where I'll leave it there.
So is it your belief that you want to push for polymorphic value types?
Oh, absolutely. I've offered to help Guillaume get the state of the proposal into a form that we can discuss it at the face-to-face meeting.
Great. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also think that's definitely on the list of things that I would like to get still into 3.0 of the not yet done things. Yeah,
that's valuable information then. Great. Does somebody have to say something about?
There is one comment online. Yeah, I'm not muted. So Portal says, for implicit function types, one of the examples in the Dotty documentation is about an API for building tables using implicit functions. For that in particular, scope injection seems a bit better. So that's the comment we have online.
Well, I think there was a longer thread on scope injection, and unless I misunderstood the way that comment went, I think there was at least it looked pretty plausible to say that something along those lines could be built using implicit function types. Maybe I missed some details which it couldn't cover. But I think I think we need to have people sitting down and spending a bit of time working with the language feature and seeing if they can actually build useful stuff with it. At the moment, I'm not sure that that's not the case.
But does anyone know a good treatment of scope injection, what it is, its foundations, and so on? Because I always understood it's something incredibly dirty that you shouldn't be doing. So, so along the lines of dynamic binding, say.
I think when we talk about scope injection in those specific threads, I think most people refer to something like Kotlin's thing. I don't know how they call it. It's this function types or something like this.
Yeah, that's also incredibly dirty, I would say.
The example in the scope injection thread I thought was actually quite a nice one. It's effectively kind of capabilities type thing, and the specific context is sort of async with wanting properly scoped uses of a weight. I think implicit function types just do that. I think it was elaborated enough during the thread to convince me that we didn't need anything else beyond it. Beyond people spending some time actually getting experience with using the language feature to do that kind of thing.
I just wondered whether there is something else to scope injection which is different from it and dynamic scoping. There's something that I don't know about scope injection. For me, it was just basically dynamic scoping, and the reaction is basically don't do that. But
I wasn't convinced it was dynamic scoping that was being.
Okay. Yeah, it was static.
It was static scoping combined with capabilities, and I think that's just what you get for free. I mean, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, I know that. Implicit parameters and implicit function types can do that. But, I just wondered whether there was something more like a principled way to do it otherwise. I know about receiver functions in Kotlin, and I think there's sort of let me say a marginal way to do it by sort of overloading the meaning of this, which is sort of dubious and works sometimes, but I don't think it's as general as implicit function types.
Great. So essentially, the only action we can get out of your feedback, Marius, is that we can improve the examples and we can try to word them out better, right?
I think that would be useful. I mean, I absolutely agree with what Eugene's comments. I mean, I think coming out with motivating examples for the language feature is definitely desirable.
Great. So I think that it would make sense that the people in charge of writing the proposals are in charge of this, and also it would be great if you guys can help them and provide, like, maybe be the ones proofreading the examples and seeing if they seem okay to you.
Jorge, I think I need to stop you there. So yes. I think the people who proposed it, which is largely me, don't have the bandwidth to write a tutorial.
I was thinking of
and to come up with lots and lots of. Oh, sorry. Yeah, but I think it's the same thing. Guillaume is overloaded as he is, and Guillaume should actually spend his valuable cycles to come up with polymorphic function types, and not. So it's difficult. So I think, yes, we have to go to a point where we say, good. We need to get to a decision, yes or no, with the feature. And if we sort of have doubts and say, well, we need to see more examples. But then there's a second issue to say, well, when we come out with that, we need for essentially the programmers, the Scala programmers, we need a good tutorial. But I think there it's just a matter of timing. I would say the tutorial should come typically, or we have time to do it between feature freeze and final release. That's the time to actually then invest it and try to write books and tutorials and all these things. But I think right now it just would essentially clog up the queue of things to do.
Okay, so what you're proposing is that we continue discussing at a technical level, and then we try to focus more the proposals for the normal developers afterwards in some kind of like tutorial that people could go through and they could understand all of the features, how they can play with them, and all of that, right?
So I think we should take note and says, yes, these are definitely things to do, but we should also make a distinction whether they actually would hold up a decision or not, because I think we should come to decisions fairly soon. So I think it should be possible to come to a decision that says it's noted that for the final release, it would be really good to have more examples on this thing.
Right. So we have this. Then we will have this action of items, and then I propose that in the next meeting that will happen in November, in 1 week and a half, when we'll be all together in one room discussing all of this. I will propose to discuss this matter in more detail and try to see or try to find people that would be interested in helping getting these actionable items done, so that we can move forward. It's clear, it's noted that these actionable items will then hold up the decision, but it would be good just to do it in the future, in 3 months, in 4 months, so that the normal people are know exactly. I'm sorry, normal people. I meant that the normal, like a normal Scala developer like me, can just understand all of the technical, all of the features without understanding the technical details on how
absolutely. I mean, there will have to be tutorials on all levels, and the more we can get going here in this circle, the better. But I also believe that we will need other people, and hopefully other people will jump on board and write great Scala 3 books and things like that.
That's
about
great.
all the new features.
So also, Owen Port mentions on the chat, maybe the community can help with examples.
Yes, exactly.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
In that sense, that it doesn't need to be in 4 months. We can already start seeding.
Exactly. I think it would be great. Yeah.
Yep.
So guys,
If you are someone somewhere on the internet and you have
Welcome.
an idea that
You want to help?
that you think that the implicit function types solve your problem, please go ahead and tweak with it and report it back to us. That would be awesome.
Great.
so one comment about this, I'll try to be brief because I know the time is running out. So let's just recall how macros were introduced to Scala. So it was basically along the same lines. Hey, we have this cool, interesting idea, and let's let people figure it out. We figured out a lot, and so lots of functionality about macros that was actually discovered, not designed. And I think this is true to some other features of the language, without going into too much detail. So perhaps we need to think whether this is the approach to the evolution of the language that we like. If we do, then we can just say so. Hey, so Scala is a more experimental language, and it's fun to play with stuff. And after people play with stuff, they discover something new and really exciting, like we discovered implicit derivation. By we, I mean the Scala community, without attributing like individual bits to others. However, in that case, maybe we should have a policy of what happens with failed parts of experiments. So for instance, we know that value classes have significant problems. Macros have significant problems too. Well, I would be the person to tell you about that, right? So yeah, let's think, if we want more experimentation, what are the cleanup actions? So for macros, it's pretty painful, right? They're scrapped, but they have still not been replaced, and they probably won't. I mean, in the same to the same functionality, to the same API that they have right now. All right, yeah, that's it.
It's funny that you mentioned value classes. Did you follow the Kotlin thing? They just introduced value classes in Kotlin 1.3.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
So it's true. I wouldn't call value classes a failed experiment. It's something everybody was doing, and I think with the JVM restrictions, there are certain things that are just hard. So I don't really see why value classes by themselves would be failed. But I definitely agree that we have to go slow and methodical. But I also want to remind people that essentially many of the ideas of this thing are now 5 years old. So we really mulled over them for 5 years. We implemented them. We played with it. We wrote papers about it for some time. We researched the theory, and I think the theory is really important because essentially it gives you the laws and guidelines to discover the right things. So it might look like a rush of new features right now, but a lot of these things are actually quite old by now. At least from my perspective, they look old. Because let's say we designed them like 3 or 4 years ago, or things like that. So, but I agree that we should have sort of a. So what I would propose, maybe, I think we can discuss more in the live meeting, and it's an important point to discuss, is to say that we will come up with a provisional feature set by first half 2019, hopefully, and then we have basically a year to refine. If during that year it turns out that actually that wasn't a great idea, then we should be prepared to essentially either remove a feature or put it under flag or something like that. But I think essentially the validation period, it's sort of a chicken and egg problem right now that we have, because essentially it's not production ready yet. There's not much code out there, so we don't have much experience with it. So we have to sort of cut the node somewhere, and maybe this idea to give us 1 year of essentially stabilization time, also to essentially revise some of the features if they don't work, maybe that would work. I would hope that it's only isolated cases that would be the case, but I might be proven wrong.
All right. I think as long as we're conscious about the choices we're making, that's great. And so because a clear policy is much better than nothing. So thanks a lot for elaborating on that.
Great. So it looks like we are approaching the end of the meeting. So now I'm gonna hand over
the
mic to Daria, and Daria will explain us the program she's been doing for our November retreat, so to speak. It's not a retreat because we're gonna be working all the time, and we're gonna be discussing a lot about SIP proposals we have and how we can improve the migration and all of these questions that the community has been asking for a long time. So during 3 days, like Daria, please continue explaining, because I'm gonna steal the topic.
No, it's fine. Martin, please just mute your mic. I think, yeah. Martin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second.
Perfect. So the main question, I hope everybody looked up the program, and if not, I can link it here in the chat. And I'm going to explain the back thought, why the program looks like it is, but it's up for you to comment and tell me if you would like something to be changed. So the idea is to
we will try to link it now for the other chat, because this is the internal chat.
Yeah.
So we'll try to do it as well for the other chat so that the viewers can have a look at it.
Okay.
Okay.
So the idea, not at the moment, because there are many
afterwards,
comments that are not for anyone except me. So the idea is so we have 3 days, and my idea was to take the morning of the first day to sit together and go over questions that keep repeating and we keep circling around them, which is normal and we should, but are also never acknowledged like as a list or frequently asked questions or something like this. So I would like for the community to produce a statement that would address types of questions like what is actually a SIP committee role moving forward, because that's something that we constantly stumble. Martin has a certain vision, a SIP committee has a certain different vision. So even if the committee doesn't agree on all these questions, it would be really nice to at least acknowledge these questions and put a couple of lines and say, okay, this is a process, this is where we stand. Moving forward, we are going to keep on updating this statement, for example. And so for that, I assigned basically 2 hours in the morning, and then a half an hour in the evening, where we would, so between the morning and the evening, I would be the one actually making the document after your discussions, so that in the evening we can put it all together and then go live, and I can read the statement or just update the community what was happening during the day. So that's, let's say, the first part. That would be more like organizational and general discussion. After that, I imagined having basically a day and a half going through all the features that all the changes, add-ons and additions and removals, and giving each 30-minute like a blitz presentation in 2 groups. So we would have breakout groups with the goal of filling in one form that I built that we can work on. It can be like more detailed or less detailed. So to say that each feature we would know what needs to be done, so that after the meeting is over, after the 3rd day, at least myself and Jorge have an action plan. And even if certain things cannot start right now, we can put a date when they're going to start or who can do it. So in some instances, it can be the community. So we can make a post, this is what the community can do, or it needs to be Guillaume, or it needs to be Martin. And then we can actually schedule different action points so that things start moving on. So that is a very brief explanation of the first like 2 days. And then the 3rd day anyway is going to be a Saturday. And if we actually go through all the points as imagined, like we really stick to this 30 minutes per feature, then the 3rd day can really go, the committee can go deeper discussions, technical discussion, philosophical discussions, and we can go for a hike doing that, or we can still be in the office. But at least we know that in the first 2 days, we have the list of open points, action points, couple of deadlines, and so on, that we can move forward. So this is presenting the program. I had pleasure working with Eugene a little bit, or more than a little bit. Then Jorge, Sebastian, and Martin also took a look before I shared it with the whole SIP committee. So thank you everyone for bearing with me. I would really like to hear your thoughts. Yeah, and one very important point is that we are very flexible. So it says 30 minutes, it can be 45 minutes. We can have shorter breaks. I mean, it can be arranged, but just for the sake of the conversation, I made it very structured like that. Yeah. So please, all the comments welcomed, and again, with the goal of having a very fruitful 3-day conversation. We have many people coming in town only for that. We have very tight schedule with Scala 3 coming next year, and so on and so on. So please, we have another, let's say, 5 minutes, or you can write to me with the comments. But yeah, voilà.
I think everyone is fit for a Mont Blanc hike.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyone? Everybody's muted. Heather is like, no, I don't care. I'm not there anyway. Come on, somebody say something. Have you seen the program?
Yeah, thank you so much for your work. It's amazing.
Thank you. Do you think we can make it? Do you think it can come true?
Yeah, we can always hope, right?
Yeah, hope dies the last.
Great.
Miles, do you have any suggestions? Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, no, it looks like a great agenda. It looks like it's going to be a packed and busy time.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Honestly, I strongly suspect that we will get through the first hour or two and probably want to tweak the remainder. It's the kind of thing that I suspect we will probably get a better feel for how we want to
arrange it. Exactly. So by the end of the first day, you see there is like what we need to achieve is also seeing how do we go into the next day. So it's more or less, yeah, let's try that way and then go forward. Yeah, but the idea was that knowing how you usually work, each and every one of you is under heavy deadlines, last minute, and then you perform the best. I chose to make like such a context for you, so you actually deliver a lot. So it was more or less on purpose. But yeah, let's see. Okay, so then on the first day we decide, but we are all in agreement with making the statement on the first day. I mean, is that something that makes sense?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, totally.
Then
Great.
if I get the statement, then I don't care about the technical things. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. That's that for me.
So we have reached the end of the meeting, and so I guess that we'll see each other in 1 week and a half.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time and
commitment.
Yeah.
And thank you all 22 people that joined live today for
Yes.
listening and commenting, and that's really, really nice.
It's great having online questions and answering them online as well.
All right.
Good.
Thank you, everyone.
Good.
Goodbye. Have a good
Goodbye.
day.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
evening or day or wherever you are.
It's all-